Welcome back to Computer Science, exploring variables through programming. Variables, containers used to store information. Data, information that is stored and manipulated within a program. Modify, to change or adjust data within a program. In this week's lesson, you'll develop programs using variables to store and adjust data. Your I can statement. I can develop programs using variables to store and adjust data relevant to your curriculum. What do you think a variable is in programming? Variables are like magical containers that hold information for our programs. They can store numbers, words, or any kind of data we need to work with. Today you'll learn how to develop programs effectively, understand how to store data using variables, and even modify data within your programs like coding pros. Let's look at an example. Let's use variables to keep track of the score and the number of lives remaining in a hypothetical game. Creating a variable is really easy. You just use the word var, followed by a label that you want to give that variable. You can choose any label you want, but it helps to choose a word that describes the variable that you want to store. So let's label our first variable score to keep track of the score, and our second variable lives, so we can keep track of the lives in our game. Remember these labels, as we'll need them later on in order to use the variables. We can assign a value to the variable using the equal sign like this. Let's set our starting score to 0 and the number of lives to 3. Remember, you only need to use the var at the time that you want to create a new variable. A common mistake is to use it every time you want to refer to a variable. Also, be sure to avoid mixing up the order when you call your variables. The label needs to appear on the left, and the value needs to appear on the right. Often you'll want to create a variable and assign it a value right away. There's a really convenient way to do this with one line of code. This is sometimes called initializing the variable. It's important to realize that this single line of code is actually doing two things. First, creating the variable, and then second, assigning it value. Let's take a moment to talk about that equal sign. In many coding languages, the equal symbol is called the assignment operator because you use it to assign value to a variable, and you're probably used to seeing it in math, but in programming it's a little bit different. If you were in math class and you saw this, something would definitely be wrong. The score cannot possibly be both 5 and 7. But remember, this is not a math class. With code, a computer is executing a set of instructions one after the other, so this would just tell the computer to set the score to 5, and then on the next line, set the score to 7. In an effort to avoid confusion, programmers often don't use the word equals when they see the equal sign. Instead, they use the phrase gets the value. So when we see a statement like this, we could read it as score gets the value 7 or score gets 7 for short. Some programming languages avoid the confusion altogether by representing the assignment statements with a sideways arrow like this. To use a variable, you just refer to it by its label. Anywhere the variable name appears in the program, the value currently stored in the variable will be retrieved from memory. The tricky part is that when using a variable, you often can't see visually what its value is. To bypass that problem, you can use console.log to display the value like this. This is a really handy trick, but remember, there's a difference between showing the value of a variable and writing out the variable label. When text appears in quotes, you're telling the computer to write those literal characters on the screen like this. But on the other hand, without the quotes, the computer assumes that you're referring to a variable called score, and it will attempt to retrieve its value if you haven't made that variable. Then the computer will give an error. This week's lesson activities may take a little bit more time to complete, but it's the fun stuff, so you don't want to skip anything. We will build upon these skills throughout the rest of the course. Great job, Epic Comet. You're ready to move on to the next activity.